So we've discussed now quite a lot of options with respect to the security of your MySQL environment. And ultimately, what you probably will see in many environments is some kind of security policy that outlines all of this or encompasses everything. And for the most part, it's just a document that indicates and outlines all of the steps to take to help fortify your MySQL environment. So there can be any number of things included within that, but a lot of common practices and things that you generally want to just make sure that you address. Things like restricting or disabling remote access to the servers themselves. Obviously, in some cases it is required, but you always want to make sure that it's, again, only those who require it. So anyone else, simply don't give them remote access to the servers. You definitely want to change the default root username and password. Virtually every attacker out there is aware that root is the highest level account. So they will always use that as a target in terms of their attacks. So changing the credentials on that account obviously makes it much more secure, because now they have to completely guess at what the username and password might be, as opposed to at least knowing half of the equation. If they know it's root, they need only attack the password. Remove any unused accounts. People come and people go. So as they leave the environment, you definitely want to make sure that the accounts they were using to access the databases are removed. The sample databases as well, you might want to consider removing them. They don't have any security on them by default. Now, they aren't really they obviously don't contain any important data, but they still represent a means of accessing the server and getting into the databases themselves. So it is recommended that they be removed on servers that aren't, just development or testing servers. Anything that's actually used in production, you should remove the sample databases. Also run MySQL as an unprivileged user. And this, again, is something that's very common. In other words, even if you are the highest level administrator, create an account for yourself that is basically a standard user, something that does not have the privileges. Only use your privileged account when necessary. So for day-to-day operations where it's just maybe selecting data or performing some standard maintenance routines that don't really require elevated privileges, use your regular user account. Grant only the necessary permissions to the appropriate users, and this comes back to that principle of least privilege. You don't want to start at the highest levels. Do the complete opposite. Start at the lowest levels of access and then grant them additional permissions and privileges as necessary, as opposed to making everything wide open and then having to start pull things away. Only the necessary permissions to only the appropriate users. You definitely want to enable logging and restrict access to the logs. So logging, of course, just records what's been going on, but then you don't want anyone to be able to access the logs themselves. So you want to make sure that they are also restricted. And you definitely want to take advantage of MySQL's built-in capabilities. There are functions there that can encrypt the data, or as discussed, we've seen you can implement things like OpenSSL, but there are built-in security features within MySQL to help protect the environment. And certainly, last but not least, keep the operating system and the database patches up to date. Almost all of the updates have something to do with security, so you generally want to make sure that you're very on top of those. It doesn't mean you should just blindly install every update. Do a little bit of research as to what the update is for, but for the most part, be aware that the updates come out quite regularly, and that most of them are security related. So again, all of these things need to be taken into consideration when defining a security policy. So you're ultimately just outlining the documentation that says we need to do this, 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 and this when considering security. This way, if something does get corrupted or breached, you can maybe go through the security policy and find out, how did that breach happen? What was circumvented? What was bypassed? What was missed? That way you can obviously update and implement a new policy or a new safety feature in the future.